All right, we're going to begin chapter 12, 13 today. We kind of got a overarching theme. We're basically going to be in the industrial city setting. What we're going to see is one of the first mass movements of people on a scale like we've never seen before, moving into a very congested urban location. In fact, we're going to be introduced to a term known as urbanization, which is the mass movement of people to the city. Well, one of the largest components of the population growth that we're going to see swell around major industrial cities of the north is going to be due to the fact that we're going to have our second largest wave of immigration come largely from a pull factor for factory jobs. We're going to talk about what is known as new immigration. If you remember, in the 1830s to the 1860s, we learned about what was called old immigration. Old immigration involved the two largest groups of the Irish and the Germans, but also the Chinese in the latter part of the 1840s and the 1850s, immigrating to America. And by 1860, we found ourselves in a civil war, and then after the Civil War, we see immigration pick up again. Except this time, as we move into the 1870s, 1880s, and up to 1900, this new wave of immigrants is going to be in the millions. We're going to talk about 25 million immigrants coming from mainly Eastern Europe, but not limited to Eastern Europe. From all different ethnicities. We're talking about Italians, Greeks, Russians, Slavic people groups, more Irish, more Germans. It is really a multicultural wave of immigrants coming to, yet again, America. The place in which these immigrants will land is called Ellis Island. It is kind of like a checkpoint for immigrants who are coming into the country. And then there from Ellis Island, they will kind of funnel throughout New York City and look for the familiar. They will look for sounds and smells and the way people talk and the way people dress that look familiar to them, much of what it would look like in their home country. And what ends up happening throughout New York City is we get these ethnic enclaves or ethnic ghettos in which you have Little Italy, where thousands of Italians are going to live. In fact, there are going to be more Italians in New York City than are in Rome, Italy during this time period. You're going to have Greek town. You're going to have places where Chinatown, where the Chinese kind of try to preserve their customs, their food and their culture within the nook of a city in America. So we're really going to get this, new massive wave of European culture again, okay, this time mixing in with the culture that has been here since colonial times on the East Coast, the culture that has been ever changing as America has gone through its own growth since colonial times. It's really going to create a very diverse and unique society. A large component of these immigrants who were coming to America this time were not necessarily of the Protestant faith. You did have some Lutherans who were coming, but you had large-scale Catholics who were coming, and a fair amount of those who participated in what is known as the Jewish faith as well. So you get different orthodoxies of religions also coming in to what, by this point, at least in the northern part of the country and parts of the southern part of the country after the Second Great Awakening, is a large Protestant-based faith here in America. So we're going to kind of, have some religious tension yet again with a new wave of large-scale Catholics as well coming in, included. On the West Coast, you have a check-in point called Angel Island in the San Francisco harbor. We have a large scale of Chinese immigrants coming to the country. We have some Japanese immigration as well. We've set up some trade markets in Japan, before the Civil War and throughout the Civil War. And then, of course, we have some Koreans as well come in this time period to the United States. In regards to this influx of immigration, we're going to see yet again another wave of xenophobic fear or nativism rise up. And it is not uncommon for store owners to put signs in their window, if you're Irish, you need not apply, or no Chinese wanted, all kinds of, we would call them derogatory or discriminatory based on race statements to keep immigrants out of, let's say, a business or from even applying for a job. We have a escalation of nativist sentiment from religious overtones as well, that this is another papist plot, that the Pope is sending Catholics to make America Catholic again. It really just stirs up some previous sentiments that have been here throughout, that each generation tends to transfer over to the next group of immigrants who come because they're not native to this country. We also know that there was at least, let's say, there was a plan to try and marginalize these immigrants and keep them at a level of where they could only participate in low-paying jobs, not in the necessarily in the corporate or private sector, but in the bottom means of production on the assembly lines in the factories. We don't necessarily see this second wave of immigrants move to the west. They stayed in these huddle masses. They stayed in these pockets and these enclaves in the city, and which of course led to impoverished slums and just poor conditions of the city. Anytime there are a lot of people in one area for a period of time, there tends to be the leftover garbage or leftover trash that one would create. And unfortunately, in America's cities, with this overcrowding of Americans who are coming for factory jobs and this wave of immigration as well, a result of that is going to be what we're going to refer to as poorly run cities with slums and some impoverished conditions as well. We're also going to, some of our writers are going to, take more of a white supremacist attitude, and they're going to write some books such as Madison Grant's that's called The Passing of the Great Race. And in his book, he's saying that the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, with this influx of immigrants, will be no more, because there will be mixtures or biracial families created, and America will never be the same again. And this is, something that had been said in previous times, but it's going to be flaunted, it's going to be published, it's going to stir up an animosity and hatred yet again against foreigners who are coming to this country. Most of these immigrants, as I mentioned, are going to be funneled into industrial jobs, and it's quite unique that in these industrial jobs is where the racial stereotypes or the ethnic stereotypes begin to break down. When you have multiple people groups from multiple countries in close proximity working on assembly lines day in and day out, for the most part, they're going to learn from each other. There's going to be cultural breakdowns and maybe even some respect for one's race or one's ethnicity, and it really kind of begins to, reference a term that is used known as the melting pot. America kind of, with these cultures and with these ethnic groups, kind of in this time period begins to kind of create a new America by blending, in a sense, all of these immigrants. Other historians say it's kind of more of a salad bowl in regards to, in a salad you have toppings, you have tomatoes, you have cucumbers, you have separate vegetables in that salad. And some would say, no, technically the immigrants tended to try to preserve their culture, preserve their tradition, and they didn't necessarily melt or assimilate into American society. Most historians, on both sides tend to say it's a little bit of both. You do get this Americanization through the educational system. So let's just say the children of these immigrants, when they grew up here on this soil, native to this soil, they were more Americanized than mom and dad. So it could have been a little bit of a melting of the next generation. Regardless, these immigrants are going to contribute large scale to this industrial boom and this industrial revolution. And they're going to make more money than they ever would have made in their home country from where they left. So the intention of coming to this country, even though they're working in for low wages and impoverished conditions, in some cases it is an opportunity, an improvement by being here. And although we can view it as not being potentially good conditions to be part of, it did present opportunity. One of the other parts that the immigrants kind of fell victim to were the bosses in which they were controlled by in their factories. Notorious bosses in New York City like Boss Tweed, he would in turn, in order to hire and not fire certain immigrants, he would tell the immigrants to go home and vote a certain way when it came time for elections. And we call this the political machine. And these political machines ran rapid through American cities where they could guarantee the immigrants, or they could bribe the immigrants in some way to secure votes for their party, for their whoever their mayor candidate was, whoever their potential governor of the state was. And it really straddles and falls in line with a lot of the corruption from the national level down to the local level. And these immigrants tended to vote in blocks, and there tended to be a large amount. If one family member voted one way, the rest of the family would fall in line as well. So it really became a incentive to make sure that these millions of immigrants who are here, in some way their vote could be taken advantage of. And these political machines hit the ground running, recruiting, bribing, advertising, feeding, and collecting a large amount of immigrant votes. In some cases, they even had some immigrants who would show up with a beard, and they would show up with a little bit of a longer hair. They would vote, they would go home, they would cut their hair shorter, they would trim their beard, and then they would go vote again. Maybe they'd leave the mustache, then they'd go home, shave their head, shave the mustache, and vote for a third time. There was no voter ID, so it was, voters could vote multiple times if you could disguise yourself at different precincts even. So it really was a corrupt way of securing power, more so for the boss of a business, so he could get kickbacks from the mayor or the governor or whoever was involved in the corruption of these city politics, which is another lesson we'll dive into as well. But there was, once again, we refer to this as new immigration, and from here we will see how these immigrants will fuel and be part of the American society, and of course also part of the Industrial Revolution.